Hello and welcome back to Beyond Words. In this video we're going to be taking a look at Phillip Schofield and the controversy that surrounds him at the moment. If you live in the UK and you have any form of electronic device, you've probably seen the scandal that is going on right now. He's accused of having a relationship with a much younger man on the set of This Morning. This is, as far as I know, the only long form interview that he's done on the subject. It's with the BBC. I used a shorter interview that he did with The Sun, I believe it was, to baseline him. So we have a general idea of how he acts under stress, and even when we're discussing these topics in particular, which will help us to weed out some of the things, some of the signals that we're going to see coming up. So this first question is looking at the circumstances surrounding the other person involved, the other man involved, how he got into television, how he met and interacted with Phillip in those early years.
Well, just more or less about the same time, because I'd organised it.
And what did he ask you for? So he asked you for work experience and you said, sure, come and have a look?
Well, I've done it all my life. I'm best friends with the people who got me into television. And I've always believed in paying it forward. And so that was my, it's just didn't think about it, just did that.
So when the interviewer is answering the question, there is some compression in the lips. As he's going through his answer, we get a single shoulder shrug a little bit later on and a double shoulder shrug. You can even hear this deep swallow during the answer. His eyes break down and his head follows a little bit, and that's something we usually associate with shame. So when I was watching this and I was thinking about whether or not he was being deceptive, I used the behavioural table of elements, which was designed by Chase Hughes, to structure whether or not there is a likelihood of deception. And when you're using that tool, a score of 11 is the threshold for likely being deceptive, and that answer gets a 10.5. And that's without the shame involvement and without this massive eye block that he does at the end. The eye block is very interesting because he closes his eyes, then his hand comes up and kind of dances around in front of his face, and when the hand moves, his eyes are still closed. So he's really distancing himself from this one. With the other cues, perhaps we could say that there's some likelihood of deception. Obviously, it doesn't quite meet that threshold, but it's not obvious to me what he would be lying about in this case. He either did or didn't, or is or isn't friends with the people that got him into television. Seems like a weird thing to lie about, but there are definitely some signals that let us know that something isn't quite right here.
When you look back now, if you were to look back at those messages now, is there any sense in which you were flirting with him?
No. I've been 41 years in television. Nothing like this before. No accusations. I mean, this is all accusations.
Okay, this clip does concern me a little bit. First of all, we get a big pause before he starts to answer. He does start shaking his head, but he doesn't say anything. And that only comes up when he is talking about sexual encounters between him and this other man. But it's a big deviation from his baseline. Even when he's very emotional and dealing with difficult concepts, he does answer pretty much immediately. Whilst he's shaking his head and saying no, we get a big eye block. He closes his eyes for, I think, a second or a second and a half. Whatever it is, it's a long time, way more than baseline. There's some fading facts. It's much quieter than his usual nose. It's way shorter. We have a resume statement when he's talking about how long he's been in the business, for 41 years. Obviously, nobody that has been in the business for 41 years could ever do something like this. He's shrugging, which is consistent, sort of saying, look, there's nothing more to this. It's, I've never done anything like this before. So that's consistent, but I do think we get a single shoulder shrug as well. It is hard to say whether or not he's gesturing with that hand. He starts to gesture after the single shoulder shrug, I think. So I am counting that one. And if we total that up on the behavioural table of elements, we get a 13. So he might be lying about this one. Obviously, it's hard to tell. This is a very high pressure situation. All of these cues, most of these cues at least, are really signs of stress. So what we can more accurately say is he's very stressed about this, as you would be if you are being asked to defend the claim that you were flirting with somebody underage. Whilst we cannot be completely certain, there's definitely some cause for concern for me about this clip. I'm not sure I buy this one. So this is a bit of a longer clip, which makes the scoring on the behavioural table of elements a little bit harder, because obviously over the whole length of the clip we might get up to that threshold level. I could try and look for more defined clusters. There are a few, but I just haven't bothered with this one.
So at that point you weren't in any kind of a relationship?
No. God, no.
Right, okay. How long after that was it that you had the beginnings of a sexual relationship with him?
He'd been working at the show for a few months, and we become mates. We were mates, and we around the studios, you hang out together, you chat to each other, that sort of stuff. And then in my dressing room one day, something happened. Which, obviously I will regret forever, for him and for me, mostly him. But that happened maybe 4 or 5 times over the next few months. And I know it's unforgivable. But we weren't boyfriends, we weren't in a relationship. I was really in a mess with my own sexuality at the time. And it just happened.
So as we go through, what I see is there is some sadness in his brows to start with. The inner corners kind of peek up a little bit. He's gesturing with his with his right hand, in our left of space, which he tends to do when he's describing positive things. And this is when he's talking about being mates with him and being around the office or around the set and just joking around. So that all seems pretty good. It seems like he genuinely did enjoy the company. There is some tension in his jaw when he stopped to reflect when we get to what happened in the dressing room. There's a lip retraction there, which is about reassurance. We get some psychological distancing with something happened. All of this to me looks like he is dealing with emotion. He is trying to describe things in a way that doesn't look too bad for him. There's some more tightness in the jaw. His blink rate goes up, and there's a lip compression and a tongue jut, maybe. It sort of looks like he's wetting his lips at the same time as they're coming together. They're going back a little bit. So he's clearly quite stressed about this, but it doesn't look to me like he's lying about anything. There's no signs that are close enough together and are dense enough in this answer that looks like he's being deceptive. When his head kind of comes up like this, that could be a sort of aggressive display, kind of exposing the throat, chin comes out. But in this case, I think it's about sort of more disbelief. He kind of, I can't believe that. Which I think is consistent with his overall message of happened a couple of times, he's filled with regret about this. The message does seem congruent throughout this whole answer. So I'm not seeing a lot of deceptive indication here, although there's definitely elements that give him stress. This question is about whether or not there was an abuse of power at play here. And I don't think that Phillip thinks that there was one. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't, but I don't think Phillip thinks there was.
And do you feel, just listening to how you talking about it, do you feel that what was morally wrong about it was that it involved an abuse of power because you were an older guy who had more power than him?
Obviously that criticism has been levelled at me, but I've never done that in my whole life. I've never abused my power anywhere. I'm not a bully. I don't. God, you read the things that you're supposed to be. I don't lord it around TV studios. Everyone is a friend. I've gone through all of this time. Most of the messages I've got are from people that I work with saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe they're saying this. I mean, we love working with you." I snapped once around about the time that I was coming out. I snapped at one of our producers, and after the meeting, I immediately got up, went to her, and apologised. It's not me. I don't do that. I'm not rude on the studio floor. I don't bully people. I don't lord it around. We're all a very, very on one level team. And that's been the important thing for me in 41 years of television.
I can see.
He does touch his nose a lot. That's one of those things that popular culture thinks is a brilliant indicator of deception. If you touch your nose, you must be lying. It's not how it works. It is one of the only indicators that the scientific research that has been done on deception says is a strong indicator. At the same time, he's kind of mouth blocking, and he does do a lip retraction as well. The lips kind of pull in. We're seeing a lot of that. which is not surprising. It's typically to do with needing reassurance, which I'm sure he needs a lot of right now. So it's an interesting kind of movement of finger to nose, blocking, lip retraction, a lot of uncertainty there, but I don't think that is an indicator of deception. As we look at him, he's gesturing on our right-hand side of space, which is somewhere that he usually associates with negative things. That's congruent with the message, saying that I'm not a bully. And this whole answer is essentially an exercise in socializing. It's kind of bringing as many people into the argument as possible and saying everybody thinks that I'm great, everybody agrees with me on this point, which is interesting. Again, could be deceptive, but I'm not so sure on this one. When he talks about being rude on the floor, his tongue does come out in a tongue jut, something that I usually associate with either distaste or displeasure or with getting away with something, sort of cheekiness. I think what happens is when he says that, there is a specific instance that comes to mind, but he sees that as a single instance, not as a general rule that applies. And then we get this 41 years resume statement again. If we score this on the behavioural table of elements, we get a score of 10. So that's not quite high enough to be likely deceptive, but there may be a couple of other things that I missed in there. So let me know if you think there's something else going on. If you don't believe this, tell me why in the comments. So this issue of an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, is right at the heart of a lot of the speculation that's going around this controversy. The other man involved, did they sign an NDA at all?
I can see how extremely concerned you are for the welfare of this young man. Did you love him?
No, we were just mates. We were mates.
Do you know if he has signed an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, preventing him from speaking?
No.
You don't know if he has?
No. At the time, I was asked that earlier on. Did I make him sign an NDA? No, absolutely not.
But there's a question of whether or not he was, as it were, paid off. And
No.
in effect, if he was paid off,
No.
was he paid for his silence?
No, God, no.
No. So is he free to speak if he wants to?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, what he wants is for all of this to go away. He wants a quiet life. He didn't want any of this to happen in the first place, and I'm sure he completely regrets it. It was my fault, so he has nothing to regret because it was my fault.
I want to draw attention to the difference between the first no, the no we were just mates, and the no, God, no.
No, we were just mates. No.
It's a lot quieter, it's a lot softer. It's not a strong, confident denial, which is what we look for most of the time when there are these big accusations. I'm also going to call this a non-answer statement. Technically, the answer that he gives is addressing whether or not Phillip told the other guy to sign an NDA, which is not what the interviewer asked. There's also a shrug, which might be consistent with this idea of, I don't know if he signed an NDA, the shoulders can come up for apologies and a lack of information. So I'm not overly concerned about that. Whenever I hear a reference to God or to religion, it just pricks my ears because it's one of the things in Spy the Lie, which is a fantastic resource for lie detection. It's one of the things that they highlight as being a very good indicator. I would say that we can use a pinch of salt here. God no does come up a few times. It does seem to be in his baseline. But what isn't in his baseline is that word absolutely. Another word that sets my ears pricking. One of those words that for some reason seems to crop up a lot when people are being deceptive. Then there's this big display during the denial. We get a lip retraction, a tongue jut as the tongue comes out and wets the lips, but it does come past the barrier of the lips. Another lip retraction, and then some lip compression. Now I think this lip compression is actually concealed anger, because I see some tense lower lids, some tension in the lower lids, which you do see in the anger facial expression as well. And I think the anger is around having to defend the accusation. I don't think it's aggressive towards the interviewer. I think it's more defensive, but maybe it is just a lip compression, maybe it's anger. Let me know what you think. If we score this on the behavioural table of elements, we get a 10 or an 11, depending if you call it a lip compression by itself or anger by itself. So there's definitely reasons for us to be concerned that we might not be telling the truth or the whole truth, and I think that's more likely. I think that he knows whether or not there is an NDA, or perhaps he knows that there is no NDA but he's not going to say anything. So in effect, it's like he signed an NDA. At think there's something more that he knows. This is a lie of omission rather than a lie of commission. So we're continuing on with the NDA discussion in this clip.
Has there ever been, or is there, an injunction or any sort of NDA preventing media coverage of your relationship with him?
No, and that was that was one of the things when the rumour started, and then when it came to light, and obviously both of us said, "What the hell is this?" I don't know. I said, "Well, it'll go away. I'm sure it'll go away." And then it started to grow legs, and it got bigger and bigger. It was said there was a super injunction. It was said I'd got him fired.
Before the interviewer even finishes the question, there is an attempt to respond. There's an eyebrow flash, an eyebrow raise, lip compression, lip retraction, tongue jut, and a chin thrust. The chin comes forward, something we usually see in aggression. And I think he's using this almost as a mediator, as a way of stopping the interviewer from talking. He's basically saying, look, I have something to say here, you're wrong. He coughs to clear his throat. That could be a fight or flight response, tension in the vocal cords. And then he comes up to his brow. Now, I'm not quite sure what to call this. There's definitely an element of blocking, because I'm using a barrier here. There's definitely an element of eye blocking as well, because his eyes shut. He could be rubbing at his eyelids. Could be as simple as that. I've called this a facial touch, which I think is more traditionally around the cheek kind of area, but I don't see why this doesn't count as well. And then he starts kind of picking at his nose a little bit, which is a huge deviation from baseline. We did see a nose touch earlier on, but this is massively overplayed. Okay, let's look at the final clip.
You're very clear about something else which you want to correct, which is, let me ask you directly, did you speak to anyone at all at ITV about moving this young man onto another programme?
Absolutely, categorically not. He was a really good colleague, runner, like very good, and so he applied to go to Loose Women, and got the job entirely on his own merits. And I can remember him coming to me and saying, "Mate, I'm going to Loose Women." I said, "That's fantastic. That's
so the
brilliant."
suggestion that ITV moved him to solve a problem that they had festering on this morning is untrue.
I do not believe there is any truth in that at all.
Okay.
So this is a really interesting one. Throughout pretty much this whole answer, his brow is up and his upper eyelids are up as well. This is something that Greg Harley calls request for approval. This is the quintessential example that I'm going to think about from now on whenever I hear that term. And it's basically communicating a desire to be believed, kind of, you believe me, don't you? It doesn't mean that he's lying, but it just gives us a reason to look a little bit more closely. There's that word absolutely again, which has only really cropped up in moments where we need to be a little bit more suspicious of what he's saying. What's interesting is that he's using his left hand, he's using right hand space as we look at him, which is something that we associate in him with negative information. But the content of what he's saying should be positive, about how this man was able to get a job on his own merit. I would expect him to gesture on the other side. So again, maybe something to look a little bit more closely at. And then right at the end, he's shaking his head. We get a lip compression. We get a non-contracted denial. I do not believe. I think the believe and the there is any truth in that, I'm calling that psychological distancing. I think you could have just said, no, that's not true, or untrue is the word that he keeps using in this. I think that would have been totally sufficient. I do not believe that there is any truth in that. Way too contrived. Just doesn't sound believable to me. The behavioural table of elements score is 10, so we're not quite at that threshold for lying. However, earlier in the interview, he does hint at least, this is the way that I heard this, he does hint at the fact that he did get him a job, or he was at least influential in getting him a job in other areas of ITV. So although he's denying it, he's kind of admitted to it already earlier on. So there we go. I'm not sure about you, but there are definitely some points in here that give me cause for concern. And I'd like to see the private messages that he's talking about. I'd like a bit more of an investigation into exactly what the relationship was like at different points in time. Because it doesn't seem like we have enough information to either confirm or deny some of the things that, certainly based on the behaviours we've seen, give us a little bit of doubt as to whether or not he is being totally honest with us. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know by subscribing to the channel and I can make more videos like this. I hope you enjoyed it and I'll see you in the next one.